Wait a second. Yeah. Oh, I see. All right. B'chol asher yaseh yatzliach, asher yaseh yatzliach, b'chol asher yaseh, asher yaseh yatzliach, asher yaseh yatzliach. V'hoyo ke'et shasul al palgei mayim, asher peryo yitain b'yitoi v'yalayla ha'ibol, kol asher yaseh yatzliach. Chodesh Shevat is a great tug because the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah brings Arba Rosh Hashanah Haim. There are four Rosh Hashanahs, there are 4 New Years. And according to Beis Shammai, which some say that's how we're going to paskin Lasud Lava in the future, Rosh Chodesh Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan. And of course we paskin like Beis Hillel is Chamisha Asar Boy, that the 15th Tu B'Shvat we call it, is when we celebrate the Rosh Hashanah for the trees, for the tree. But anyway, according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, it's Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan. And we mentioned in our video this morning how in the community of Verms they celebrated Rosh Chodesh Shvat because this was the day that they were able to return after they had been expelled from their community for a number of months, close to a year, 9-10 months, from Shvishal Pesach until Chodesh Shvat, and then they were allowed to come home, and so they fast. So Erev Chodesh Shvat, Yom Kippur Kotan and Shovavim, and a special extra tightness for this all in one day. 3 reasons to fast. Erev Chodesh Shvat. It's also the Indian of Erev Rosh Hashanah to fast, and then to come into Rosh Chodesh Shvat as a time with a little bit extra simcha, and to have a little bit more of a Suda than you usually would have, in order to celebrate a Suda's Haidoah, a Thanksgiving feast, to celebrate the return to their homes. And so this was something that was celebrated. In any event, Shvat is a month, it's a tremendous segula, because on one hand, it's the 1 month, the whole month is the Yemei Shovavim. On the other hand, we make tikkunim both by fasting of Shovavim, but also by feasting on Rosh Chodesh and on Tu B'Shvat. Really, the truth is from this date, from Rosh Chodesh Shvat, we don't have 2 weeks that go by without some kind of a celebration. Meaning we have first, today's Rosh Chodesh, right? Today, tomorrow, Rosh Chodesh, then 2 weeks, Tu B'Shvat. Then 2 weeks from then, Rosh Chodesh, Adar, and then 2 weeks later is Purim. Then 2 weeks later is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Then 2 weeks later is Pesach. Then 2 weeks later is Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Then 2 weeks later is Pesach Sheni, and a few days later is Lag Boimer. And then 2 weeks later, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and then less than a week later, showing a Shavuos. We don't go 2 weeks without a yontiv all the way from now until Shavuos. Every 2 weeks we have something to celebrate in addition to, of course, Shabbos every week. And so the koyach of the simcha of this day is tremendous because it's a koyach of Rosh Hashanah le'ilan. Ilan is the gematria havaya adnus, the yichud kutshabrichu shchinte. The word amen, not a woman, a man, right? And this, and also this ki automates a sada. The human being is the tree of the field. And so, according to Das of Beis Shammai, we have ktsas, a little bit of a taste of what's coming in 2 weeks from now, when we paskin like Beis Hillel. Of course, Beis Shammai comes from the sphere of Gvura, and from the left side of the spheres. And so, in a certain sense, we have the whole Indian of Tu B'Shvat is that's when the tzaf, the in the trees, the sap of the trees starts to flow, right? And it's something you can't see. It's a hidden potential, and then it's what comes out. And for that reason, it's a cutoff date for the tithing of the fruit. So Beis Shammai holds it today. Beis Hillel holds it's 2 weeks from now is Tu B'Shvat. And the whole concept of that is that we're taking it's a whole Indian of something that's hidden that's coming to scholars. It's also the Indian of Purim, of Megillus Esther. Megillah is a lashon of Iskalos, and Esther is a lashon of Haster Aster's Ponai. So it's the Giloi, it's the revelation of that which is hidden. And so today, which is by the opinion of Beis Shammai, because Rosh Chodesh, when the moon is hidden, there's that hidden potential, and then it goes on to the full moon, and that's how we paskin like Beis Hillel, which is then is the Indian of Chesed. And so we're bringing the potential into the actual. And the koyach that we can, the energy that we can attach to here, every month, the name has something. This Svarva creation bring the Ein B'Shvat of Koishel. There's a pasuk that says that there's no falling among the tribes, and in the Chodesh Shvat there's no michshol, there's no tripping, falling on the during Chodesh Shvat. And Chodesh Shvat is the oisi is either shenishma b'seres tovus, that we should hear good news, or simchas b'seres tovus, or joy and good news. Either way, they're both. It's all good news, joy, things that we hear. So the fact of the matter is of that how in the times of the early Achronim, this is when we came back. My ancestors and them celebrating this day. The Chavos Yor brings it down in the Makar Chayim and in the Minhagei Berms, that this was the day that they got to come home where they wanted to be. The place where they wanted to be. So it also has that koyach of bringing us back where we want to be. That we go from the fasting that was yesterday, today, into the feasting in a minor way. And this is how we make the tikkun and Shovavim on Rosh Chodesh, B'davka by eating and by having the suda. You say Zayni v'Vashaya. The pasuk in Tehillim says, "I will have a feast and I will be saved." So Heiliger Reb Zisha's Chutei Galeno, his yard site is tomorrow. It's Beis Shvat. Heiliger Reb Zisha, and also for me it's a shtickle to the Seidah, because unfortunately I went to jail. It was on the yard site of Reb Zisha, and so I got out the next day. So I have a shtickle of Indian to make it to the Seidah. when I got out of jail that one time. But now I get out of jail every day. So, so I should have a Siddur every day. Anyway, this whole Indian, that this whole concept that we can grab onto is really a powerful one. It should give us tremendous amount of inspiration and joy, even in a difficult time, that we can still serve God under all conditions, and that we can have the joy of restoration and the joy of good news, and that we should hear good news. And the whole inyan of Shnishma B'Soros Tevis, we should hear good news, and Shema is a lashon of Havana, that we should understand the goodness of the news. Shnishma B'Soros Tevis is the inyan of Chodesh. So in that way, we shall be zeiche to Takatzawa, get the Chodesh, to the the Chodesh, and get the pirates, will ausbeten like it's an Estrig, and the Irish will help him, will talk to zeiche sein, to Skalos Chod Shemayim, particularly in these days of Shovavim. We can often zay große Sachen, like we said before, that we can accomplish things now that we can't accomplish on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. And this is the day that's among the Mei Shovavim, the day that has the Koyach of Rosh Hashanah in it, just in the way of, because of Rosh Chodesh, and also because of the Shammai's Shita that it's Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan. In a certain way, there's a bigger shaykhis to Rosh Hashanah on this day, maybe even more than there is on Tu B'Shvat itself, because it's also the Kesi Liam Chagenu. That it's a day of the hidden, because the moon is hidden. And so that hidden potential is going to grow and shine and shine and shine and grow bigger and bigger in the next 2 weeks. And so we should be zoicha to absorb that energy, take that potential into actual, and make his kash for soul of tzaddikim, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, on all the levels, and recognize what's really important in this world, not to be distracted. So Taka, like we were saying, we're looking for the Scholars, Kvei Shemayim. B'nai Shalom should be Megala, everything that's good, hidden in everything. Even when it's not going what we think it's our way, doesn't matter, it's going the B'nai Shalom's way. And so we can absorb that and take that with us. And now as we're going into Parshas Va'era, which is, the first 7 of the Makkos, the first 7 plagues that the Almighty smote the Egyptians with. We can, that energy, it's interesting, you notice, just like the spheres, this week, Parshas Va'era, you have 7. You have 7 Makkos, right? And then, next week, Parshas Boy, which is my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, my birthday. Actually, my English birthday is tomorrow, but my Hebrew birthday is Yud Shvat, and this year is Shabbos Parshas Boy, and I have my Bar Mitzvah Parshas Boy. We can, that boy, Bayis Aleph, is Gematria Gimel, it's 3. And you have those 3 plagues that take place in Parshas Boy, and then they have the Exodus. You have the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it's the same pattern that you have with the Yud Spheres, with the 10 Sephiros. You have the 7, which are the Midos, and the next week you have the 3 of the Moichin. So this week is the inyan of Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus, of the 7 Midos, that through whatever there was the Makkah on the Mitzrayim, from there came the blessing and the life to the Bnei Yisrael. It's an interesting thing. I learn Gemara every day, and just today I learned the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where Rebbe Akiva talks about this question of Tzfardeya. is one of the markers in this week's parsha. It just so happens that's the Gemara I'm learning, and it's the Inyan of the Yom is this week's parsha. And so the second plague of Spardeia, of the frog, is the kasha that Rabbi Akiva asks there in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Why does it say Tzefardea? Why does it say in the singular instead of Tzefardeim, in the plural? And so the Gemara, so Rabbi Akiva says it was actually just one big frog, and the people, they saw the frog and they hit the frog, and the frog split in two, and they kept hitting the frogs, and that's how so many frogs came. Really, it was originally one frog, and they kept hitting the frogs, and they split. The truth of the matter is, in Africa, which is, of course, is where Egypt is, of course, but it's sub-Saharan Africa where these frogs live, there actually are frogs that go through their larval stage. Instead of in water, they lay the eggs, I think, on the back of the male. And so you have this type of a thing where you have one frog, right? It's the male frog, and the female lays the eggs on the back, and the skin grows over it. And then it's a crazy looking thing. The the baby frogs, they go through the larval stage as the tadpole, and then they go into the stage of a developed frog, but they're still small, and as they just pop out of the back of the father, which is a very strange thing to see. Not exactly what Rabbi Akiva is describing there, but it's interesting that in nature there is a similar type of a situation with the frogs, that you'll have a big frog, relatively speaking, and then a lot of little baby frogs popping out right out of the back of the frog, from the skin, growing in under the skin. It's a very strange phenomenon that happens in nature. I believe it's in Africa where this frog exists. But the interesting thing is that the Chachomim disagreed with Rabbi Akiva. They said, Rabbi Akiva, what do you have to do with Kaloch Me'agadata V'leich L'Goyim V'Holos? He said, what are you doing with these Agadic teachings? That's not your department, Rabbi Akiva. You should stick to halacha, to the laws of plagues of leprosy, and the impurity of a tent where a dead body is. Very complicated, difficult laws, and taras. The other Chachamim said, Rabbi Akiva, that's what you should stick to. And they said, when it says Sephardeah in the singular, it means that initially one frog popped up and started the plague, and he started singing his song, his croaking, and that croaking attracted the other frogs to come, and that's where the plague came from. And the fascinating thing, generally you have a few times in the Gemara where Rabbi Akiva is scolded for certain statements in Agadata. It happens a few times throughout Shas. In those places, generally speaking, the reason why Rabbi Akiva is criticized by the other Chachomim, by the other Tanoim, is because Rabbi Akiva was saying something that could be interpreted in a heretical manner. And so, in order to avoid the appearance of heresy, which is interesting because Rabbi Akiva, of all the Chachamim, he was the one who was able to go into Pardes. He was able to go in B'Shalom and leave B'Shalom. The Gemara in the Chagiga, we all know. He was Nichnas B'Shalom and Yotze B'Shalom. So Rabbi Akiva was able to accomplish what Ben Azai and Acher and the other one was um, and I don't remember now. They each one of them, right? The big one was Acher, was Elisha ben Avuya. He was uh, Koitzitz in the Tias. He cut the saplings, right? And he was he became almost like a Gnostic in a certain way in his views in his theology. And Rabbi Akiva was able to go B'Shalom and leave B'Shalom, which is interesting because after that we know he died as a martyr, a horrible, painful death. So what exactly was this that he entered in peace and he left in peace? And I'm basing this partially on what I heard today from Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok Shlita. He had a video came out today. He's in Costa Rica now, and he made this video talking about this. And that's why it's kind of on my mind. But going back to our Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is talking about the Mak of Tzfardea, why were the Chachomim upset at Rabbi Akiva for saying that it was one big Tzfardea, one big frog, one big ein größer Rosh, gehakt, and gehakt is geworden, a million fresh, until that they smote this frog until it became millions of frogs. Why is that problematic to the Chachomim? And it's not problematic to say that the one big frog came out and sang his song, and that attracted the other frogs. And why did the other Chachomim prefer that interpretation as to why it started in the singular and then later went to plural, as opposed to, well, actually, when it's announced, it starts in the plural, but then when the actual frog comes out, so the Allah Tzfardea, that the frog in the singular went up, and it was hit, and that's what created the plague, which is really a strong Musar void. You know, so many Bali Musar make from this statement of Rabbi Akiva that Rashi brings, and Rashi doesn't bring the opposing opinion. So it seems that Rashi prefers Rabbi Akiva's shot over that of the Chachamim. This is in Sanhedrin Samach 9 on the base, the 67b in Sanhedrin. So Rashi seems to prefer it, and the Bali Musar seem to prefer it because they say, if you have a problem and you react violently, you're going to have two problems. You're going to have four problems. You're going to have 16 problems. You're going to have more and more problems. It's not worth it to react violently, and the big danger of reacting violently. So why would the Chachamim be upset that Rabbi Akiva brought out this tremendous Musar vort of teaching, do not be violent, because violence only begets more violence and more plagues and more suffering. And it's interesting because the derech that the Chachamim are bringing it seems like the Indian of Chesed and Ahava, that he sings a song, a beautiful song, and it attracts the other frogs. And I think the answer, like we said before, is connected to everything that we started with what we said about bringing the potential into the actual. And the difference between these two approaches again, so Rabbi Akiva's approach, focusing that the plague is a plague. And the tsuris that it brought on the Egyptians to suffer from this plague that they were smitten with, right? That God smote them. And so it's a negative aspect. So the Shachamim want to say it's not so much that they were smote, they were smitten, the Egyptians were smitten in the negative of the plague. Rather like they were that the frogs were smitten with love. And that there's beauty and something positive, a beautiful song that attracts to call the friends to come and gather together for a purpose. There's beauty in that. And so the Chachamim wanted to emphasize that. Why? Because again, what did we say before? Whenever the Chachamim were criticizing Rabbi Akiva for his stance in Agadata, for his opinions that he stated, it was because Rabbi Akiva was saying something that could be interpreted heretically. And they wanted to fight against the heresy, even though, of course, Rabbi Akiva was Tzaddik Yisod Olam, Kodesh Kadoshim, and he's in the highest places in heaven because he's a holy martyr. And not only that, but Moshe Rabbeinu recognized Rabbi Akiva's greatness. That a certain way Rabbi Akiva himself was greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And that when the Chazal say in last week's Sedra, that when it says Tishlach v'yad Tishlach, Shalchad Tishlach, that the Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, send somebody else. Don't make me the. There's an opinion that it's Rabbi Akiva, and the Samarov has a whole beautiful vort on that in the Briyo. We don't have time to get into that right now. We learned it by Shalashidis. We didn't make a recording, even though it was after the Zman. We could have made a recording. But again, we don't have time for that right now. It's late. I only plan to make a 5-minute video. It's almost a half hour now. So anyway, even though Rabbi Akiva meant well, and he meant to teach authentic, pure, good message, the message that the Chachamim want to bring out is that they felt that by focusing on the negative, focusing on the plague, one could come to heresy because one could become depressed and upset. Not only that, but one could come to think, again, what was the heresy that the Chachamim were fighting against? Was a dualistic heresy, a Gnostic heresy. And they were worried that the Minim, the sectarian heretics, including Gnostics and these other groups, would bring these teachings that are completely antithetical to Torah. Because by their focus on this dichotomy of good and evil. And so by focusing on this aspect of the anger, and anger growing and creating and so forth, it could lead to heresy. But instead, by focusing on the hidden potential, as the Chachamim wanted to bring out, the hidden potential inside of the plague, that how, as we've discussed many times, Parshas Boy, that the hidden aspect of the plague of darkness was too much light. And so for the Mitzrim, they received it as a plague of darkness. But we, the Bnei Yisrael, L'chol Bnei Yisrael haya or b'mishroisam, so too it's the same concept here. That this plague that the Egyptians were smitten with and hurt them, the inner panemius of the plague, the inner concept behind the plague was positive. And there's beauty and love in it. and a song and friendship and achdus and Mesiras Nefesh. Like we tell the stories of the frogs, how they went in even into the ovens to be Meiser Nefesh to fulfill the will of God. Through this, there's the revelation of the positive aspects hidden even within the plagues, even within things that we don't want, even things that seem horrible and painful. There is always good hidden in it. Why? Because it has to be that way. Why? Because again, the dualists, the Gnostics, they focused on this dichotomy of good and evil. The Zoroastrians the same way. But we know Isaiah gave a prophecy, Yeshayahu Navi, Isaiah 45. He prophesied specifically to Koresh, to Cyrus, who was a Zoroastrian king. And he called Cyrus by name centuries before he was born, a miracle. And he prophesied to him, explaining to him that God is totally one. And the oneness of God means Kol Man Ovid Rachman Tav Ovid. Everything that the merciful God does is all for the good. It's not like the Zoroastrians who are teaching dualism, that there's a good God and a bad God, and they're fighting with each other, there's a God and a devil and this and that. But rather, Isaiah's message is there's only one God. In our liturgy, we change it to Voris HaKol. But in Isaiah, it says that God forms light and creates darkness. He makes peace, and he creates evil. Meaning both good and evil come from God. There's only one God. And that ultimately everything is good. And it's only the shell, it's only the klipa that makes it seem like it's evil, but the pneumius is good. And so that is the message of Rosh Chodesh Shevat. That's the message of the Mach of Tzfardea. And the Irish will help in that we should have this Galus Kvod Shemaim. There should be, like the Tzaddikim say, a revealed good. All the goodness is there, but we should have revealed good. The Galus Kvod Shemaim, Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Meher Remain Amen. Getting Chodesh, Nisma B'Sur Stavus. Thank you for watching. I have to go now. I would sing another niggin or something, another zemer. I don't have time. I have other things to do. I do have to bench, but I can do that later. So thank you for watching. Sorry for everything. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. We'll see you later. How do I turn this off?